Now we get into positioning. Positioning can be a tricky concept, so feel free to rewind and replay these sections. So HTML flows a certain way. So first, like a glass of iced tea, an HTML block will adapt and take up as much width as possible. And then the text within that block will fill up as much width as possible, and then move on to the next line, and then make itself as tall as necessary to match the content size. So however much text you have, it'll fill up all the width that you give it, and it'll be as tall as it needs to be. The second thing to know about positioning is of HTML flow is that HTML elements are displayed in the order that they're written. So from top to bottom. So if you write A, B, and C in descending order, then it'll show up as A, B, C on the browser. The third thing to know about positioning is that there's such a thing called stacking. So browsers have 3 dimensions, and each HTML element belongs to an imaginary layer, and that you could nest elements, and child elements will appear on top of parent elements. And so those are your 3 ways to have flow, and now we'll talk about the ways you can disrupt that flow. So adding height and width will disrupt the fluidity of an HTML block element. Position relative, position absolute, and position fixed, which we'll see more of in a minute, disrupt flow by removing elements from the flow. So in this top down to bottom flow, you can add these positions to things and it'll take them out of that flow. And then float disrupts elements by moving them side by side or reversing their order or both. And z-index can change how elements are stacked. Let's get into CSS positioning. So there are 4 major values. Again, static is default. We don't really talk about static. We don't need to. The 3 other ones are the ways we really can disrupt flow. So relative, absolute, and fixed. There's another one called sticky. It's not used as much. It doesn't function all the time. It's kind of experimental. So we'll skip sticky for now and just stick with relative, absolute, and fixed. Position also has directions. So we can move things to the top, to the right, to the bottom, and to the left. Again, position static is the default. Nothing about the flow is disrupted with static. We don't have to write static, so there's no need to actually type out position static. This is the default. So position relative, if you set something to position relative, then you can move it. The way we move it is with a direction and an amount. I'll show you this in a second, but this example div, it's position relative. Now we can move it in a direction and at a certain distance. So let's try on our example website. So if we add position relative and left 50 pixels, this is what happens. It starts here, and then it moves 50 pixels. So what did we do? When we left off in the Sling session, this is our site, purple text, and this orange text right here. So what we're going to do is turn this about div into position relative and move it 50 pixels. So if we go to Atom, we can add position relative so that we can start to move it around. And then let's try moving left 50 pixels. Now what this actually means is that it goes from the left 50 pixels. It doesn't go in the left direction. It just starts from the left position When we say left 50 pixels, it means it goes from the left in the opposite direction 50 pixels. From the left in the opposite direction 50 pixels. So we save this and go back to the browser. I refresh this, then it'll go from the left 50 pixels. So actually it'll go to the right 50 pixels. 3, 2, 1, refresh. And now it moved 50 pixels from the left to the right. Notice the other elements didn't move. So ignore the color of this text here. But the picture underneath the about div doesn't even know that the about div moved. See this in the browser. This picture here is not aware that the about div moved 50 pixels. Doesn't care. So if we wanted to move it and say, do we need this position relative and just did left 50 pixels, that's not enough to move it. So if I were to go back to Atom and comment this out, I would show you in the browser here that if I were to refresh this, it should move back. It moves back because it has to have both position relative and left 50 pixels to move. So right now, without position relative, it doesn't go anywhere. Put this back, save, go back to here, refresh. Now it moves. So you have to have position relative and left 50 pixels for it to move. Otherwise, it won't move. So review, this thing with the slashes and the asterisks is a comment. It's not rendered in the browser, so you can use this to turn things off like this, or make notes to yourself like this. Another way we can do this is with position absolute. So let's change it in our browser, show you what that looks like. First we'll go to Atom, change this from position relative to position absolute. Three, two, one, refresh. Now we got all sorts of messed up things happening here. So what happened? So we changed it from relative to absolute. Then we got a mess that looks like this. What happened? Here it is again. So what happened was, for one thing, the about div was taken out of the flow. So when it's taken out of the flow, then things act like it's not there. The rest of the stuff acts like it's not there. So the picture underneath moved up into the space that the about div used to be in. So here you can see that once we took the about div out of the flow, the rest of the stuff in the text or in the web page moved up into the space that it was in as if it was not there anymore. So why would we even use this? We can use this to put an element anywhere you want. But with great power comes great responsibility, as we know from Spider-Man. And CSS trick says that its overuse or improper use can limit the flexibility of your site. So be very careful when you use position relative or absolute. Position fixed is similar to position absolute in that fixed elements are removed from the flow and you can put them anywhere on the site. The difference between fixed elements and absolute is that fixed elements do not scroll. Let's go back to our example. I'll add a bunch of lorem ipsum text to make a bigger page so that you can see the scrolling of it. And in our case here, so we switch this to fixed. Let me add some lorem ipsum text to this just to give us a little extra room. Let's add a bunch more. So just to refresh, we got a whole bunch of text here. We got position fixed for the about div. Again, it's moving from the left 50 pixels. See what it looks like in the browser. Okay. This doesn't scroll yet. Maybe I'll shoot this in here to give it a little more room. And so when I scroll, this about div stays in place. Now we can get into the floating. Floats are unpredictable because it not only affects the element, but it can affect all of the elements surrounding the floated elements. So floats can mess up everything. So why would we use it? We use it to push an element to one side and wrap text around it, which is what's happening in my mockup. So we can use float to make that happen. So let's try it. Let's go back to Atom. Add a float left to our image, our one image. Now I'm going to switch this back to no positioning to it so that the about div goes back into its original position. So I'm just going to add float left. So what do you think happens after I add float left? This is what happens. So let's show that in our browser. 3, 2, 1, refresh. And it worked. The image went to the left and the text flowed around it. So now the text and the picture are side by side. So what did happen? The picture floated left, and then the text underneath it moved up into the space directly to the right of the picture. So float left, picture floated to the left, and everything else moved up to it, next to it. So why is this unpredictable? For certain cases, if your text is shorter than the image, so like here, in this example, you can get weirdness that's not even related to the floated element. So this was floated, and then you've got all this mess down here that's not a part of it. Further, because float left takes the image out of the flow, which is this gray box, the yellow paragraph's height is only the height of the text. So again, this image was taken out of the flow. So now it doesn't affect the height of this yellow container. The yellow container is only bounded by the text that's in it. So the height of the image isn't taken into account. And now you get all this stuff crashing into each other. But there's a way to fix this. Introducing ClearFix. So here's the type of code that you need for a ClearFix. And what happens with the clear is it pushes elements after the float so that you can stop things from flowing to the right of the picture or to the left of the picture, however you do it, using this code here. Specifically, this is called a ClearFix, this stuff here. And technically, this is a hack, but it's a good one, and all the smart web devs out there say it's fine, so it's good enough for us. This group class that you see here, group, gets applied to the parent element. So these floated elements inside the parent element get cleared using this ClearFix. In the HTML, we'll also add horizontal line break and apply the same class to that, same as it was for the parent element. The history of ClearFixes is long and full of other solutions that work too, but this one is the easiest to implement. There is clear left and clear right, but they don't always work, so they're not reliable. So let's do this in our example. We're going to add the group class to the parent element. So that's the one with the picture and the text in it. And we'll add the break, this horizontal break with the class group in it, where we want the float to stop. So after the picture, the heading, the text, and this link, we want to stop the floating and start new lines. So we need to add group to this div here, which already has a class, but that's okay. We can add multiple classes together by just putting a space in between the class names. So this is what it's going to look like once we do it. After this link, it starts over underneath the image. So let's do it. Go to Atom. Got to find that here. Projects, group, add groups in here. And then when we want to stop, we want the float to stop, we'll add br class equals group. So again, add it to here, horizontal line break, class group, add group to the parent div here. So we'll save this. And then we'll go into our CSS and write the ClearFix, which is here. Group after curly brackets, content, double quotes, semicolon, display, and they say do table, and then clear both. Now we added our ClearFix hack to our code. What we want is for the floating to stop right here, and all the rest of this text goes underneath the picture. So let's see if it worked. 3, 2, 1, refresh, and it worked. So we get that nice break here, and it starts over again down here. Now let's talk about z-index. With z-index, you can stack divs with position elements and a z-index. So first you have to position it, then you add a z-index. So what's going on here, this great big mess, I move the about div behind all the other divs so you can see that the picture and the other text overlaps the about div. So it looks like the text and the picture are all on top of the about div. So how do you do it? We can add a position, let's say absolute, and then we'll add a z-index with some kind of number. So in our case, I picked minus 1,000 or some other negative number. The default z-index for HTML is 0. So the screen itself, z-index 0. Positive numbers mean the elements are coming towards you. So z-index 1,000 is 1,000 layers away from the screen towards you. So from the screen towards me. If you had 1,000 pancakes at z-index 1,000, then there'd be 1,000 pancakes between you and the screen, which sounds great. Negative numbers are going away from you. So z-index minus 1,000 is 1,000 layers from the screen, but in the opposite direction, so through the screen out the other way. So you have 1,000 pancakes at z-index minus 1,000, maybe 1,000 pancakes on the other side of the screen going away from you. Let's show you what that looks like. Figure this out. Position, absolute, z-index minus 1,000 on the about div. Refresh. This should push this about div to the back. And then since we did position absolute, all these elements will flow into the space that it had taken up and be on top of it because we do the z-index. 3, 2, 1, refresh, and that's what happens. The about div goes back away from me 1,000 layers, and then the picture and the resulting other text will look like it's on top of it. Let's talk about visibility. With visibility, you can hide and unhide things. So if I added visibility hidden to our current example, I'll show you what that looks like. Let's try it on the image. Atom. We'll do visibility hidden. Save this back to our browser. 3, 2, 1, refresh. The picture disappears, but the text is still floated. You see how it's over here where there's a space where the picture would have been, but it's just not being shown. The text still floated here. So it hides the image. So you can see the space it would have taken up is still there. So the picture looks like it still would have been there, just not being seen. It's still floated, but not showing. Again, this is how it looks like in our browser. Same thing. So let's try display none. Back to our code. Change this, we'll comment it out instead. Display none. Save this, back to our browser. Now, the text acts like the picture was never there at all. So that's display none. Here again, display none.